Hello everyone. We are in section 2.2 and in this part we are going to look at the limit laws. So our setup here for the limit laws is we're assuming that we know a couple of limits for a couple functions. So we are going to let L, M, C, and K be real numbers, and two of those real numbers are limits. We're going to say that the limit as x approaches c of f of x equals L, and the limit as x approaches c of g of x equals m. So those L and m are the function values or the y values that those respective functions are approaching as x gets really, really close to c. Okay. So for these limit laws, which you don't need to memorize the numbers of these are just kind of numbered so that we can have a list. You don't need to remember like, oh, this is law number 3. Just to know the basic principle of these limit laws and just kind of how they work overall. Okay, so most of this can be fairly intuitive if you just think of those limit values as like y values for the functions. Okay, the y values that are getting approached. So what this first limit law here says is that if we're taking the limit as x approaches c of the two functions added together, so we've added together f of x plus g of x, then as x gets close to c, if we want to find the limit of that sum, we're just going to add together the individual limits. So this right here is called the sum law. For clear reasons, we are taking the sum of the two functions, and so you just take the sum of the two limits. Now, really similarly, in the second law here, if you subtract the two functions, then to find the limit of that result, you're going to subtract the two limits. And this is called the difference law, because we're taking the difference between the functions or between the limits. So sum and difference. Here in number 3, we are multiplying our function by some real number, because remember k is a real number of some sort. So we're essentially scaling the function up or down, multiplying by some constant there, and you're just going to scale the limit up or down by that same factor. So you'll multiply the limit by that constant. And so this is called the constant multiple law. I can spell that correctly. Here we go. Constant multiple law. Okay. Now we get into multiplying, but with two functions. So if you take the product or multiply f of x and g of x, and you'd like to find the limit of that result, you're just gonna multiply the limits. So it's pretty straightforward for many of these. You can remember what to do just by seeing what you're doing to the functions. This is the product law. Okay. And then in law number 5, we are not taking a product of the functions anymore. We're taking a quotient. And so we're going to take the quotient of the limits. And note there is a little disclaimer on this one. This will only work as long as that denominator limit m is not 0, because we still can't divide by 0, not even with limits. Okay, and this guy is called the quotient law. All right. Now we kind of take law number 4 up a notch. Law number 4, the product law, you would multiply one function times another. Here in law number 6, we are raising a function to some power, the nth power. And Okay, n is a positive integer, so we are just raising it to some power, like the second power, third power, etc. So you can think of that as repeatedly applying law number 4. So like if this was f of x squared, for instance, it'd just be like f of x times f of x. So according to law number 4, we would multiply like L times L instead there. So what ends up happening when we repeatedly apply that law is we just end up taking the limit to that same power. So if you're taking f of x to the n power, the result for the limit is going to be L to the n power. So this is the power law for limits. And then you can do the same type of thing if it is a root instead of a positive integer power. All right, so n is still a positive integer, but now we are making it the index of a root instead. Okay, and so this is called the root law. So the overarching theme of all these limit laws is whatever you're doing to the functions, you're just going to do that same thing to the limit value to calculate the new limit.